Our Saturday morning began like any other, wrapped in the warmth of pancakes and family. But before noon, hate found our address, intent on shattering everything. It started like any other Saturday. The smell of pancakes and maple syrup hung thick and sweet in our little house, a comforting blanket against the crisp autumn air. My 7-year-old daughter Lily was humming a tune from her favorite cartoon, her feet kicking a happy rhythm against the legs of her chair. Her whirlwind of dark curls, a perfect blend of my wife Sarah's and mine, bounced with every beat. I watched Sarah flip a pancake, her smile as warm as the griddle, and I felt a wave of such profound contentment it almost hurt. This was it. This was everything. Our quiet, happy life in a town we'd chosen for its tree-lined streets and promises of community. That contentment shattered an hour later. It came in the form of a piece of cheap paper tucked under my car's windshield wiper. I'd gone out to grab the morning paper from the porch box, and the stark black and white flyer caught my eye. The headline, in a severe, angry font, screamed about reclaiming our heritage. The words that followed were a venomous soup of coded language and barely veiled threats, all aimed at people who looked like my wife, like my daughter. They were calling it a Patriots' March, scheduled for noon, right down our street. Our street. It felt like a violation, a poison pen letter addressed to our very existence. I brought it inside, my hands shaking slightly. Sarah read it over my shoulder, and I felt her whole body go rigid. The warmth drained from the kitchen. The smell of pancakes suddenly seemed cloying, sickening. "They can't," she whispered, her voice tight. "Not here." But they could, and they were. We spent the next hour making frantic calls. The police department was polite but unhelpful. It was a permitted assembly, they said. As long as they stayed peaceful, their right to protest was protected. Peaceful. The word felt like a cruel joke. There was nothing peaceful about the hateful symbols pictured on that flyer. Nothing peaceful about the vitriol that bled through the ink. Our plan was simple. We would become invisible. We drew the curtains, locked the doors and windows, and retreated to the living room at the back of the house, the room furthest from the street. We told Lily we were having a special indoor camping day. We'd build a fort, watch movies, and eat popcorn. She bought it for a while. Her excitement was a fragile, beautiful thing in the suffocating atmosphere of our fear. But kids are smart. They have emotional barometers that are far more sensitive than ours. She could feel the tension coiling between me and Sarah. She could hear the unnatural silence that had fallen over our neighborhood. The usual sounds of Saturday kids playing, lawnmowers humming, neighbors chatting over fences were gone. The air itself felt thin, brittle, like it could crack at any moment. "Daddy, why is the street so sleepy?" Lily asked, peering through a tiny gap in the curtains we'd missed. I gently pulled her away, my heart thudding against my ribs. "Everyone's just having a lazy day, sweetie," I lied, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. Around 11:30, we heard it. It started as a low rumble, like distant thunder, but it grew steadily, resolving itself into something far more sinister. It was the sound of marching feet on asphalt and a low rhythmic chanting. It was a single, ugly voice, amplified by a megaphone, spitting out phrases that made my stomach turn. A beast with 100 throats was crawling down our street. We huddled together in our pillow fort, the sound growing louder, closer. It was right outside now. The hateful words were clear, hammering against our walls, our windows, our sense of safety. Lily's eyes were wide, her little body trembling. She wasn't buying the indoor camping story anymore. "Who are those angry men, Mommy?" She whispered, her face buried in Sarah's side. Sarah held her tight, murmuring reassurances I knew she didn't feel. I put my arm around them both, trying to shield them with my own body, a pathetic and useless gesture against a tide of pure malice. The chanting swelled, a wave of noise that seemed to shake the very foundations of our home. I was just about to suggest we put on headphones to try and drown it out when Sarah gasped. Her eyes were fixed on the doorway of the living room. I followed her gaze. The spot where Lily had been nestled between us was empty, and the front door, the one I knew I had double-bolted, was standing slightly ajar, letting in a sliver of grey light and the full, unfiltered roar of the march. My blood ran cold. I scrambled out of the fort, my mind screaming, a silent, primal roar of terror. I crept to the door and peered through the crack, praying to a God I wasn't sure I believed in. And then I saw her, my daughter, my tiny 7-year-old Lily, in her bright yellow raincoat, was walking out onto the pavement. She wasn't running, she wasn't crying. She was walking with a strange, solemn purpose, straight towards the front line of the marchers, who had now stopped, their ugly chanting faltering at the sight of her. In her small hand, she was holding up a piece of paper. It was her latest crayon drawing, a picture of a smiling stick-figure family, one brown, one white, and one a perfect, happy mix of the two, all holding hands under a giant, smiling sun. For a single, horrifying second, the world went silent. All I could hear was the frantic drumming of my own heart against my ribs, a desperate drumbeat in a soundproof room. My feet were lead, my body frozen in the doorway. Sarah let out a choked sob behind me, her hand grabbing my arm with a grip of pure, terrified strength. But I couldn't move. All I could do was watch my tiny daughter, my whole world, walk towards a monster. The marchers, a sea of angry faces and grim determination, had ground to a halt. The man at the front, the one with the megaphone and a face like a clenched fist, stared down at Lily as if she were an apparition. The chanting had died in their throats, replaced by a confused, uneasy murmur. They were a machine built for hate, and a 7-year-old girl holding a crayon drawing was a gear they just couldn't process. Then the spell broke. A jolt of pure adrenaline, cold and sharp, shot through me. My legs unlocked, and I was moving. I didn't shout, I didn't think, I just ran. The few feet of our manicured lawn felt like a mile-long battlefield. The world narrowed to a tunnel, with Lily at the far end, impossibly small and vulnerable. I could see the man with the megaphone taking a step towards her, his expression shifting from confusion to annoyance. He was reasserting his control. "What's this?" he boomed, his voice a distorted mockery of authority. "Get this kid out of the street." But Lily didn't flinch. She just stood her ground, holding up her drawing a little higher so he could see. "This is my family," she said. Her voice wasn't a shout. It was as clear and steady as a small bell ringing in the sudden quiet. It carried in the cold air a sliver of innocence cutting through the thick fog of their malice. "This is my mommy, and this is my daddy, and that's me." She pointed a small finger at the smiling mixed-race stick figure in the middle. "We live here. Why are you yelling at our house?" I reached her just as she finished, scooping her up into my arms in one fluid motion. I spun around, putting my body squarely between her and the crowd, her face buried in my shoulder. Her little arms wrapped around my neck, holding on tight. I could feel her trembling, but I could also feel the stubborn set of her jaw against my collarbone. I faced the man with the megaphone, my fear now forged into a white-hot rage. "Get away from her," I snarled, my voice low and shaking with an anger I didn't know I possessed. "Get away from my family." The man sneered, a twisted, ugly expression. "You'd better learn to control your kid," he spat, raising the megaphone again. He was about to restart the chanting, to drown out the moment of humanity that had just occurred, but something had shifted. The unified front of the march had fractured. I could see it in their faces. Some of them, especially the ones further back, looked uncomfortable. A woman shuffled her feet, avoiding my eyes. A younger man near the front glanced down at his own hands as if seeing them for the first time. They had come to shout at faceless ideologies, at abstract enemies. They hadn't come to scream at a 7-year-old girl holding a drawing of her family. Lily's simple, honest question had hung a mirror in front of them, and not all of them liked the reflection. The leader saw it too. He saw the hesitation, the crack in his hateful armor, and it infuriated him. His eyes, cold and dead, scanned the crowd, then settled back on me and Lily. A new, far more dangerous idea seemed to spark behind them. He lowered the megaphone and took a deliberate step forward, a predator closing in. His sneer morphed into a chilling smile. "You know what?" he said, his voice now dangerously calm, though it still carried over the tense silence. The little girl is right. This isn't about yelling at a house. He raised the megaphone again, but this time he didn't point it at the sky or his followers. He pointed it directly at me, at the child in my arms. This is about what's in the house. His voice boomed, electric and venomous, shaking the very air around us. We've found them, patriots. A perfect example of the decay we're here to fight. No more hiding behind curtains. Let's give them the personal welcome they deserve. At his words, the fractured resolve of the crowd instantly re-solidified. The doubt vanished from their faces, replaced by a renewed, targeted fury. The men at the front surged forward like a wave, their eyes locked on us, and I realized my desperate act of protection hadn't saved my daughter. It had just made us the center of the storm. Panic, sharp and absolute, seized me. The crowd surged, a single organism driven by the leader's command. They weren't just marching past anymore, they were advancing on us, on our home. My front lawn, my small patch of green where Lily learned to ride her bike, was about to become a battleground. I clutched her tighter, her small body pressed against mine, and spun around, my only instinct to get back inside, to get a locked door between us and them. "Sarah, lock it!" I yelled, my voice cracking with desperation. I fumbled for the doorknob, my back exposed to the approaching mob. The few yards to the door felt like running through quicksand. Behind me, the megaphone man's voice was a triumphant roar. "Nowhere to run. We're not just passing through this town. We're here to cleanse it." The words were a physical blow, each syllable a stone hurled at our backs. The sound of their feet on the pavement and grass grew into a thunderous, terrifying rhythm. I slammed the door shut just as the first of them reached the porch steps. I heard a heavy thud against the wood, then another. Sarah was already there, her face a pale mask of terror, throwing the deadbolt home. The lock clicked into place with a sound that felt both final and hopelessly inadequate. We stumbled back from the door, into the hallway, my arms still a cage around Lily. She was crying now, quiet, frightened sobs that tore at my heart. The windows in the front room rattled as fists began to pound against the glass. The thin panes bowed inward, threatening to shatter. The shouting was no longer a unified chant, but a cacophony of individual, enraged voices, calling us names I wouldn't dare repeat, spitting threats that promised unspeakable violence. It was the sound of a rabid pack that had cornered its prey. Sarah grabbed the phone, her fingers fumbling as she dialed 911 again. "They're trying to break in," she screamed into the receiver. "They're at our house. My daughter is here." Through the distorted glass of the front window, I could see faces, twisted with hate, their mouths open, yelling. It was a surreal nightmare. These were people, not monsters from a storybook. Some of them probably lived in towns just like ours. They might have kids, mortgages, favorite TV shows. But in that moment they were utterly transformed, their humanity stripped away, replaced by a collective burning rage that was focused entirely on us. My mind raced, searching for a plan. The back door? They'd surround the house in seconds. Upstairs? We'd be trapped. The basement? A coffin. There were no good options. We were cornered. The pounding on the door intensified. A heavy, rhythmic thudding began. They were using something to ram it. The wood splintered, and the frame groaned in protest. "Daddy, I'm scared," Lily whimpered, burying her face deeper into my neck. I squeezed my eyes shut, whispering reassurances I didn't believe. "It's okay, baby. Daddy's here. We're all here. We're safe." It was the most profound lie I had ever told. Every fiber of my being screamed that we were the opposite of safe. We were at the mercy of a mob. Then, through the din, a new sound emerged. A high-pitched, piercing wail that sliced through the roar of the crowd. Sirens. Distant at first, but growing closer with incredible speed. A flicker of hope ignited in my chest. A desperate, fragile thing. Sarah was still on the phone with the dispatcher, confirming our address, her voice a lifeline. The crowd outside heard it too. The pounding on the door faltered. The shouting became tinged with confusion and alarm. I peered through the edge of the curtain again. The man with the megaphone was barking orders, trying to rally them, but his control was slipping. The sight of approaching blue and red flashing lights was a more powerful force than his hateful rhetoric. The first police car skidded to a halt at the end of our street, blocking their path of retreat. Then another, and another. They were here. Relief washed over me so intensely my knees felt weak. But the mob wasn't dispersing. They were trapped, and their anger, once directed at us, was now turning on the police. They formed a wall of bodies, screaming obscenities at the officers who were beginning to emerge from their vehicles, clad in riot gear. The situation had escalated from a hate march to a full-blown standoff, and our house was ground zero. An officer with a bullhorn of his own was ordering the crowd to disperse, his voice a calm, authoritative counterpoint to the mob's fury. It was a standoff, a tense, volatile bubble that could pop at any second. And then I saw him. Not the leader, but a different man, one who had been at the edge of the crowd. While all eyes were on the police, he had slipped around the side of our house. He was young, wiry, his face a mask of frantic rage, and in his hand he was holding a rock, a jagged piece of landscaping stone pried from our neighbor's garden bed. His eyes weren't on the police. They were locked on our large living room window, the one where the curtains were slightly parted. Before I could even shout a warning, he reared back and threw it with all his might. The sound of shattering glass was like an explosion, and the cold autumn air rushed into our home, carrying with it the full, terrifying sound of the riot happening on our lawn. The explosion of shattering glass sent a shower of sharp fragments across the living room floor. Sarah screamed and pulled me and Lily back, shielding us with her body as if to ward off the violation. The breach was more than just physical. It was psychological. The last thin barrier between us and them was gone. The noise from outside flooded in, raw and unfiltered, the angry shouts and the crackle of police radios creating a terrifying symphony of chaos. Through the gaping hole in our window, I could see the face of the young man who had thrown the rock. His eyes were wide, alight with a terrifying, triumphant fire. He'd drawn first blood. His action was a spark in a tinderbox. The fragile standoff shattered. Seeing the window break, a portion of the mob surged towards the house again, emboldened. The police line advanced, officers shouting commands that were swallowed by the roar. It was escalating into a riot, right on our doorstep. We were trapped in the middle, the symbolic prize in a war we never wanted to be a part of. My mind was a vortex of fear. Protect Lily. Protect Sarah. But how? The house was no longer a sanctuary. It was a target. Just as the first of the rioters reached the broken window, something unexpected happened. From the other end of the street, a new sound arose. It wasn't the siren of another police car. It was voices, not shouting in anger, but in unison, a chorus growing in volume. I risked a glance past Sarah's shoulder, through the shattered pane. People were emerging from their houses. Mr. Henderson from next door, a retired veteran who usually spent his Saturdays meticulously polishing his classic car, was walking onto his lawn, his arms crossed over his chest. Mrs. Gable from across the street, a woman I'd only ever exchanged polite waves with, was standing on her porch, her phone held up, recording. More doors opened. The Millers, the Changs, the O'Connells, our neighbors, people we knew and people we didn't. They were forming a line, a human chain, standing shoulder to shoulder along the sidewalk, facing the mob, creating a silent, unmoving barrier between the rioters and our home. The mob faltered again, their momentum broken by this new, unexpected resistance. They had come to intimidate a faceless other, but now they were confronted by the faces of an entire community. These weren't police in riot gear. They were ordinary people in sweatshirts and jeans, standing in defense of their own. The man with the megaphone tried to rally his followers, turning his vitriol on our neighbors. "Look at these traitors," he bellowed, "standing with the enemy." But his words had lost their power. Standing on his own lawn, Mr. Henderson, a man whose military decorations were a point of local pride, spoke for the first time. His voice wasn't amplified, but it cut through the noise with the authority of a lifetime of command. "This is our street," he said, his voice firm and unwavering. "This is our town, and these are our neighbors. You are not welcome here. Leave, now." There was no threat in his voice, only an undeniable statement of fact. His words, backed by the silent, resolute wall of our neighbors, were more effective than any riot shield. The anger in the crowd began to curdle into uncertainty, then into shame. The fire in their eyes dimmed. They were no longer a conquering army. They were just a group of angry men, exposed and outnumbered, on a quiet suburban street. The police took the opportunity, moving in and calmly but firmly beginning to make arrests, starting with the megaphone man and the rock thrower. The mob, its leadership and aggression neutralized, finally broke. They scattered, melting away like shadows at sunrise, leaving behind a street littered with their hateful flyers and our shattered window. As the last police car pulled away and an officer took our statement, our neighbors began to approach our house. Mr. Henderson came first. He didn't say much. He just looked at the broken window, then at Lily, who was still clinging to me, and gave a slow, solemn nod. Mrs. Gable brought over a thermos of hot chocolate. The Miller kids, friends of Lily's from school, brought a roll of packing tape and a piece of cardboard to temporarily patch the window. People offered words of support, hands on our shoulders, and simple, powerful statements of solidarity. "We're so sorry this happened. We're here for you. You belong here." Later that evening, long after the glass had been swept up and the cardboard was securely taped in place, the three of us sat huddled together on the couch under a warm blanket. The house was quiet again. Lily was finally asleep between us, her small chest rising and falling in a steady, peaceful rhythm. The crayon drawing she had taken outside was on the coffee table, a little crumpled, but intact. I looked at the smiling stick figures, the perfect representation of our little family. My daughter had walked out to face a monster, armed with nothing but love and a piece of paper. She hadn't defeated it with force, but with a simple, undeniable truth that had cracked its foundation. And when the monster fought back, our community, our quiet, unassuming neighborhood, had risen up to stand with her. They hadn't just protected our house, they had affirmed our place in it. We weren't invisible, and we weren't alone. The poison of that morning had been answered with an antidote of courage and community, and in the quiet of our living room, holding my family close, I knew we were finally, truly, home.